Hi everyone, welcome back to our podcast. And today we are very lucky to have Ciara on our podcast. And at this time of shooting, she has her Viva next week, and it is very exciting. And for this podcast, we will have her to share a little bit of her journey, her experience, and bring us some expertise throughout her journey, and perhaps some advice for us and other training as well. And maybe she can also share a little bit of her preparation journey for next week. And so pass it on to you, Shara. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and why you get into sports psych and how are you finding it?
Yeah, sure. So basically the route I took was when I completed my undergrad in psychology, which was at Loughborough. Initially, I was pursuing a career in clinical psychology. So I got quite a bit of work experience as an assistant psychologist in NHS mental health settings. So I was working a lot of people with mild to moderate mental health problems, using quite a few different approaches. So CBT was one of the early approaches that I adopted in the mental health services. I was later on trained in something called DBT, which is dialectical behaviour therapy. So I had some really fantastic experiences doing that. And after about 3 years, I guess, of applying for the clinical doctorate, I kind of took a step back to reevaluate my options and whether that was something that I really wanted to pursue. There were like circumstances in my life had changed, like took on more responsibility, like bought my first house, and I was just kind of thinking, like, yeah, what is the route for me now? Like, do I need to kind of settle a little bit? So I was just looking at what other options there were that you could use an undergrad in psychology in, and that was when I came across sport and exercise psychology, and showing my age a little bit now. But yeah, the time that I did my
Mm.
undergrad, it wasn't even something I'd heard about. So the more I was just so fascinated and just so intrigued. And it just really brings my two passions together of helping people within a sport and exercise context. So yeah, exercise has always played a really important role in my life. I've always been very active, tried a few different sports, used to train competitively as a dancer. So yeah, just looked into it a bit more, had a look at kind of, what route I would need to take to become, my dream was always to become a qualified psychologist. So I thought, well, actually, if I can do it this way, even better. So yeah, I found out that you have to do a master's, applied for a master's course, did that through Staffordshire University, mainly because they offered the distance learning course and I had a full-time job at that time. So I was able to do both. But yeah, and it went from there. So after the masters, I then enrolled onto the next stage, which is stage two training, which I did through the BPS, which is called QSEP. So that's kind of been the route. I'm now into my, well, I've done over 3 years on QSEP. And yeah, like Hans said, I have my Viva coming up next week. So just getting to the last hurdle now. And it's definitely felt like a really, really long process. So yeah, glad it is, fingers crossed, coming to the end.
I'm very intrigued with what you said earlier. You said when you wanted to do the degree in sports psych, and at that time it wasn't a thing. So where did you get all of this courage and confidence to get yourself into something that wasn't so established yet, and you want to put all your attention into this industry at that point?
Yeah, so like I guess when I finished my undergrad, it wasn't very much known about. And then by the time I kind of looked back on it a few years later, there was more people working in that space. Still not like it's grown hugely, like even since then. So still not as many as there are now. But yeah, I remembered like actually like I was just trying to find like what does a sports psychologist do? And I watched a few YouTube videos. I just randomly found some clips of people talking about their job and the role that they'd taken on. And I remember seeing someone who worked at what was then called the English Institute of Sport, and she was talking about kind of how she supported athletes, what she did in her role with the EIS, and how she kind of went like to the Olympic Games with them. And I just thought that is what I want to do. Like one day I'd love to go to the Olympic Games, like supporting an athlete. So yeah, I think that there were a few role models there that I could kind of look up to, and I just made sure that I did like all of my homework in terms of, so like for me, getting onto that clinical doctorate was so competitive. It still is just very, very competitive. And I thought I don't want to, start this route and then kind of fall down and face like other hurdles. So I just made sure that I was really clear in knowing what steps I would need to take and knowing what it would be like. And of course, you still don't fully know until you actually experience it. So there's still definitely been a lot of challenges along the way. But I guess, yeah, like I said, the dream is to work with athletes and go to something as amazing as the Olympic Games. Yeah, just to yeah, kind of fulfill like those passions that I have.
No, it's definitely great to hear, and what a journey you've been on so far. If we could go back to when you were younger, were you interested in sport or exercise? Did you take part? Did you compete?
Yeah, so like I said, I guess dancing was kind of, I don't know if you call it a sport really, but that was what I did competitively. So went to a lot of like national championships and yeah, competitions where it was all about kind of winning the trophies, yeah, like kind of getting that first place medal. Um so yeah, there's an element there where I've experienced, a lot of the pressure that you face in being in those competitive environments. um, yeah, and then other sports that I've taken part in have been more for recreational purposes. Um, but yeah, just enjoy being part of that environment of kind of, having a purpose in your life, having something to look forward to, having something that can just help you feel so much better if you've had a stressful day.
So you share about your experience, or you surround you with a lot of clinical experience and exposed to a lot of this type of experience that is not directly related to sport. I'm quite interested in knowing how different the atmosphere or how people talk about mental health around these different settings, and how does that impact your decision making?
So, yeah, I guess working in clinical settings is
Mhm,
quite different because there are a lot more, I guess, boundaries or kind of, particularly within the NHS, that there can be a lot of red tape around some services. You have to kind of, make sure that you are following kind of strict protocol, yeah, and adhering to like, the policies and procedures that are in place. Whereas as a sports psychologist, sometimes you might work in organizations that kind of work in a similar level, but certainly in your own kind of private practice, a lot of trainees and fully qualified sports psychologists end up setting up their own practice and
mhm.
kind of working on a consultancy basis with athletes. I guess that's where some of the challenges come in actually, is to making sure that you are kind of practicing within your remit, making sure that you are kind of offering that evidence-based support that is like relevant and applicable to them. And sometimes there is a bit of a grey area if an athlete is experiencing mental health problems as to whether it's appropriate for someone like us to work with them, or whether that actually they need more specialist expertise from, for example, a clinical psychologist. But I think that in itself is really useful for me because, again, sort of going through the qualification and, eventually being qualified, that experience has enabled me to kind of understand what I need to look out for when I'm working with athletes, and also to be aware of what my own kind of competencies are. So, I might be able to work a little bit more with athletes who are going through some form of mental health problems, just depending on what it is, how it's impacting them, how it's affecting their life. Whereas others might not feel kind of confident to do that if they've not kind of had that experience. But the other thing that working in clinical settings really helped me with was actually just developing those interpersonal skills that you need when you're working with people, because it's all about building that trust, building rapport, developing relationships with people. And it was so helpful because it can feel like you're just going straight into the deep end once you've finished your masters, and then you start working with athletes. There's a huge gap in terms of, okay, so how does this theory actually work in the real world? Like, how am I supposed to apply it in this context? But because I had a little bit of experience in a clinical setting, I could draw on that, and that helped me again just to feel confident going into my first kind of one-to-one session, and just talking to someone, asking them questions. I was very familiar with what a needs assessment is, very familiar with case formulation. That was pretty much drilled into me in clinical settings, as was reflective practice. So yeah, there was a lot of things that definitely translated really well when I started kind of training as a sport and exercise psychologist.
Well, it sounds like it really helped you. So how would you say your transition from your masters to getting that practical experience? How did you find that?
So very, very tough. I think that, I guess one of the things, as much research as I'd done, one of the things that I wasn't necessarily prepared for was just how difficult it is to find opportunities, how difficult it is to get that experience under your belt. And yeah, just being able to, first of all, get those applied hours that you need for your training, but also just to, start working with athletes, start to actually do the work, start to do that consultancy to give you that kind of experience. So I chose to do the 3-year route of QSEP because I didn't want to rush the process. I said when I started, I had a full-time job, which I've now reduced my hours in, so I'm 3 days a week. But yeah, it just meant that there wasn't that pressure necessarily of having to get hours to make money, but actually to get hours for my own development. But yeah, it was so difficult. And I remember that first year of training, I think I was about 8 months in, and I just thought, I have nothing to submit for my first submission. Like, I've barely done anything. I think I'd done a handful of like free group workshops. There was not a lot of kind of one-to-one consultancy going on. I thought, what on earth am I going to do? Like, I've got to submit in 4 months. And then my first opportunity did come about shortly after that time of panicking. So um, I did within that first 8 months. I did lots of kind of outreach. Try to connect as much as possible to kind of mainly coaches in the local area or kind of sports clubs, and reach out to officers or people in different roles within those sports clubs, and just talk to them about what I could offer, how I could kind of help them from a psychological perspective, and just try to see where that went. There are a lot of like blank responses, no replies and things like that, but there was a women's football team near me. So I initially went in and spoke to the sort of the women and girls development officer, and she was so lovely. And initially the plan was that I'd maybe work with some of like the age group teams and deliver some workshops for them, because they said they'd already had a psychologist with the women's team. So I thought, okay, that's, fair enough. But I took the opportunity there and I said, is there any chance I could maybe meet the psychologist and talk to her about her role, what she does with the team, and what that's all like, or maybe even shadow observe her. And she said, yeah, I'll try and get you in touch with her. And it took a while, and I had to chase her up a bit. I said, oh, is it still okay if I can meet the psychologist? And at that point, she said, oh, actually, the psychologist left. So the coach wants to talk to you. So I had a chat with the coach, and that's when my first opportunity came about, basically. So we had a chat together. He told me a little bit about the team, what they were struggling with, particularly psychologically. I told him a little bit about what I do. We got on really well, probably clicked quite instantly, actually. And yeah, he said, come along to training next week. So that was one of my early experiences, which like has kind of really stayed with me. I actually spent over 2 seasons there, because it was so useful for my development. And it was a really great experience. It still had its highs and lows, but yeah, I loved that, and I think things kind of started to take off from there because I started to build my confidence up a bit more. So I kind of, around a similar time, that was when I set up my private practice. So just kind of went for it, put my website out there, just started reaching out for clients, and it started to tick over. But it's still not necessarily been plain sailing, like for the 3 years that I've been on the training. Like there have still been times where I've been like, oh, I'm not getting contacted by anyone anymore, right? I need to do more work, need to do more outreach, need to do more connecting. So it's, yeah, an ongoing process.
Just goes to show that you need to keep asking for those opportunities because they won't get given to you.
It is all about being proactive. Like a few times, I think I've said to my supervisor, I feel really fortunate that that happened. Like it was the right time, right place. Psychologist had left, but she keeps reminding me it's the work that you're doing, it's the effort you're putting in, it's being taking that proactive approach to seek things out, to kind of carve your pathway, and that's kind of probably one of the main things that I've learned during the training.
Definitely. Otherwise, you wouldn't have gotten that opportunity in the first place. And I think your struggle, I can totally resonate with it. The early anxiety of not getting enough experience, and all of a sudden you're put on the spot and you don't have the experience. You don't have the knowledge to offer what you're supposed to do. So throughout that experience, what is the biggest takeaway through that first initial experience you had with that club?
Yeah, so that's a really good. So again, I felt pretty overwhelmed when I went to that first day of training. So during the chat with the coach, he made it quite clear. He was like, "You're the expert in your field, so I trust you completely to do whatever you want to do. You know, just tell us your ideas, and you know, we'll work with you to make it happen." And when I heard him say that, I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, what an opportunity, like, just to be able to go in and kind of, you know, just tell them what I think is going to work. But then in reality, it didn't quite look like that when I actually got in there. So, yeah, I remember my first day of training, I was a little bit like, okay, so what do I do here? To be honest, luckily I say, on that first day, again in our chat with the coach, he had spoken about a few individual players that he felt would benefit from talking to me because they were kind of struggling with various things. So yeah, there were a few players that he actually kind of called out and said, come and speak to Ciara, and they knew I was coming that day. So that made it quite easy for them to kind of open up a little bit to start with, not loads of players, but a handful of players, just to kind of start talking to me. But I think my key takeaway from it it was really about understanding the role of a sports psychologist, particularly within a team setting. Because I think I sort of went in having had a lot of experience working like with one-to-one clients or delivering in group settings. That was sort of what I envisioned going into that football club. But actually, by the time I got to the second season, I realised actually it's a lot more than that. It's about kind of embedding psychological principles into the culture of the coaches, working really closely with support staff and making sure that everyone's on the same page, that we've got this shared vision, this shared identity. And yeah, there was some individual work that I did. There were some group workshops that I did with the team. They obviously do still add value. But yeah, I think role clarity was a huge reflection piece for me because I sort of went into that club. I'd been so used to having worked in the NHS, I'd been so used to being in a setting where I've got a line manager, I've got somebody who's telling me what I need to do, they've given me my responsibilities, I've got certain targets to hit. So, you know, I go into my job and I know exactly what I'm doing each hour of that day. Whereas I just felt like I went into this club completely blind, no idea what I was doing, didn't really know how to do that needs assessment with a team to start off with. But again, kind of learned that that was an ongoing process within itself because, you know, especially within team settings, the environment is so dynamic, it's constantly changing. So you're constantly having to do that needs assessment, continue to observe behaviours and interactions and communication and kind of feed it all in.
So it sounds like that experience sort of, you learned a lot on the job and
Yes.
you got to see so many different challenges and you had to adapt to that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a continual learning process. Obviously, as sports psychologists, we work a lot with athletes in terms of helping them to achieve high performance. And there was a lot of reflection I did on myself around how I can achieve high performance within my role. And at times there were a lot of pressures, but a lot of the time they were just internal pressures, just my own kind of thoughts around, am I doing a good enough job? Like, you know, especially when, you know, I'd go to matches and the team just weren't playing at their best, and we knew they were physically capable of beating the other team, but for some reason they just didn't have it there on the day. And you'd have comments from the bench being like, "Oh, this is all mental, like that, they've dropped their heads, like what's going on?" And kind of, yeah, inside my head I'm thinking, oh well, that's my job, isn't it? Like I need to do better. So yeah, a lot of pressures. I kind of, yeah, had that experience of sort of, and I guess went through my own journey of actually like practicing what I preach as well, in terms of dealing with that, dealing with those challenges, and being able to kind of overcome them. And I guess, yeah, sit with some of that discomfort. And I've found that a lot of working as a sport and exercise psychologist is about being comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Have you faced any resistance within the team of going to see you? Do they see it as like the typical mental health things and not see you because of the stigma around it?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, like I said earlier on, there was a
Mm.
handful of players that did speak to me. And I thought that was brilliant. And I was like, oh, yeah, I could do this with everyone in the team. And I soon realized that actually not everyone wanted to speak to me. And there was different things that I tried to kind of get that buy-in with the players. And there was a lot of conversations that I had with coaches as well, especially by the end of the first season. We had a chat and they said, we can see the value that you're bringing. We can see how you've really helped certain individuals. We'd like people to, make more use of you, and, kind of come and speak to you more. And, we were chatting about how, we don't want to force it on them. We want them to for me to be approachable and for them to kind of come up to me. And again, that was all about building relationships and building trust. But yeah, there were certain players, I remember speaking to a couple just at the side of the pitch that would outright tell me that they don't like opening up about the struggles that they face, the issues that they're a very closed off person. And yeah, so I knew within, I guess, a few months, I knew that there were certain players where there was still a little bit of a barrier for them to seek support. And I think, yeah, definitely for them, there was still a bit of a stigma attached to it. They kind of felt like it would be seen as weak for them to come and speak to the sports psychologist. They didn't want to show that they had an issue. They didn't want to show that they needed help. They wanted to just kind of push through it. So yeah, there were some challenges around that area as well.
How did you overcome that then? Or was it an ongoing thing?
I guess, yeah, there were a few things that I was able to do. So I think, again, after a few months of being with the team, one of the things that I quickly realised was that there were some really key opportunities for me to speak to players without them necessarily knowing that I was maybe doing like a needs assessment with them. So I used to go to training once a week and I'd go to the matches every week. So at training, for example, sometimes you'd have a couple of players that were stood at the side of the pitch because they were injured or they were maybe waiting for treatment or something. So I would, yeah, just kind of approach the player and just start a general conversation with them, maybe ask how their weekend was, or, just talk about, something that they watched on TV, that kind of thing. And then kind of that sort of led into what's going on the football pitch, and just talking a little bit more about kind of what's going on for them. So I guess that was one way around me kind of understanding the players' sort of personality, the way that they deal with things. It didn't necessarily lead to kind of one-to-one support or, going into depth in things, but it was definitely a really good starting point. And again, it was a way to build trust with those players so that they could see that I was approachable, that I am a warm and friendly person, that, I'm not going to kind of, yeah. And also I think there's a certain perspective of what sports psychology looks like. And I was very mindful that when I was in the football environment. So with some players, I did go and have a chat with them in the changing room because they wanted that private area, and they didn't want other people to see that we were having that conversation. At the same time, I didn't want to isolate that, sports psychology is a service that happens away from the pitch, that's in a separate room, that's, away from everybody else. So and there was one player in particular. So I always gave players a choice. And yeah, there was one player in particular, and she said, I want us to have our chats on the pitch, so that I'm still, part of the training. I'm just kind of talking to you at the side, and that worked really well for her. So it was always kind of led by what that player wanted, rather than me trying to force anything on them.
I think that's what we're often told. Like when I first went into like doing my undergrad, I had a perception that when you're working with athletes, it's got to be in some sort of office or some sort of formal setting. But actually, you can get more out of the players when they are comfortable on the sideline, and that's like where they're most natural and where you can just have them general conversations that then leads to more psychology topics coming up. And actually, it doesn't feel like it's so forced.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I got so much value from having those conversations at the side, or like when we went to away matches, interacting with players on the coach or in the changing rooms as well. Like or sometimes it might not have necessarily been me interacting, but just having that presence, it showed that I was there if they needed me, that I was available, and that I would that I would it is quite interesting, like your position as a psychologist, because you don't necessarily want to be like really in the team, because you obviously need to have that kind of confidentiality, and you need to have obviously all the ethics alongside of it. So but you don't want to be an outsider, because you need to build that trust. So yeah, sort of being in the changing rooms and kind of having a laugh with the girls sometimes, that just allowed me to build that trust with the players. But obviously it's still keeping some of those boundaries in place at the same time.
So rule number one is definitely be present and have some humor and start everything from a small chart, and it leads to whatever is going on in their personal life, person, and how it can translate into their sport. I kind of want to know, how does it translate into one-to-one session, or how likely is it translate into that, or is it your decision, or is it the athlete decision to want to go further than that?
Do you mean within the team setting?
Yeah. So how likely is it just from a small talk, and then the athlete would be like, can we have it in a more private setting, do a more in-depth, like psychology-like session?
Yeah, generally, again, my preference was for athletes to approach me if they had an issue. But one of the things that I implemented quite early on with the team was something called a wellness form. So it was like an online form that they would fill in, and it was sent out like on the morning of each training session and match day. And it was quite a simple form. So they were asked to kind of rate both psychological and physical symptoms, things like fatigue, how they'd slept, what their mood was like that day, and a couple of other questions. And they knew that I was the one kind of looking at their responses. And the last question on the form was something like, is there anything else going on for you today, like either with your mind or your body, that you want to share? So that was also another way that kind of allowed players to like put something on that form without necessarily having to actually like approach me to talk about it. And that also, yeah, just helped to remove some of those barriers that some of the players may have had. So it meant that, if I looked at that form and someone had written something in that box, sometimes depending on what they'd written, sometimes I'd just kind of, go to training and, just check in with them at training, maybe just say, I saw that you put this, how's things, like, yeah, just maybe ask them a little bit more about it, see if they want to open up more about it. Sometimes I'd send them a text. So, when you're in a team, you usually put into a WhatsApp group with everybody, so you've got everyone's numbers. So sometimes I'd send them a message and just be like, I can see that you're struggling with this today. Do you want to chat about it later at training? So it gives them a bit of an in to be like, yeah, I'd love to have a conversation with you, I'm just too scared. Or they might have said no, like, it's fine, thanks for checking in, I just wanted to get it off my chest, or I just wanted to let somebody know. So that was, yeah, another way in. So sometimes I'd speak to players at training based on something they'd put on that form, and then sometimes that would lead to some of the one-to-one sessions that we had together. And I guess a couple of times people did, I'd say it was probably more the senior players, which surprised me a little bit because they've probably not been used to having, psychology support at all within their careers. But yeah, some of the older players, I guess, maybe just had more awareness of actually it's really helpful to speak up and to talk to somebody about things. So sometimes, they would approach me and come and have a chat with me, and that might have led to kind of ongoing sessions as well. But to be honest, again, with the one-to-one sessions, the majority of them were more short-term based, aside from one player that worked with really closely throughout the whole season. Yeah, they were more short-term based. And again, sometimes I think it's really important as well as a psychologist to get the message across that, there is no quick fix. And I think sometimes that's what players wanted from me. So there was probably a couple of times where a player had come to speak to me after she'd had a conversation with the coach, and the coach had sort of talked to her about the fact that, I don't know, she was losing focus in the match or something after making a mistake. Oh, why don't you go and speak to Sarah about that? She can probably help you. So they'd come and see me, and yeah, I think sometimes they're expecting that quick fix. I'd just give them like a strategy and they could just go away and use it. So there was a process to take around that in actually being really clear on expectations and kind of what needs to happen within that space to kind of see improvements. So it was a bit of a mixed bag, really.
Just goes to show that sometimes, often when you need to check in on them, it's like allowing them to have that opportunity to approach you rather than forcing it on them for them to actually have to speak to you.
Yeah.
So how would you
Yeah.
say that translated into working like with other one-to-ones or other athletes, or in terms of like, have you worked with other team settings and how they differed?
So yeah, I guess in terms of team settings, I've not had much other experience apart from that one. Like I said, took up the majority of my training, and so I did love working in a team. So those are kind of the opportunities I'm sort of looking for next, really. But yeah, in terms of like the one-to-one clients I work with, or even like some of the group workshops that I do as well, I think it taught me so much about who I am as a person, how I practice, I guess what brings me joy. So, the kind of things that I like working on athletes with. And that's really helped me within my private practice to understand like what kind of clients I want to work with. And I guess it's helped me to figure out like what works well. And I think again, it's especially as a trainee, but it's just ongoing. Continued personal development is always something that you're just wanting to kind of learn more and more about. And I think that when you start off, like you said earlier, Can, that you don't have much experience at all. So if you've never done something in a particular context, in a particular setting, in a particular way, you have to just start somewhere. And
Yeah.
sometimes it is a bit of try something out, see how it goes. If it didn't work, you learn from it. If it did work, that's really great. And I think certainly, the first couple of years of training was like that, really. I'd be kind of testing things out and thinking, is the athlete getting what they need from me? Is this working? Am I feeling comfortable? Which most of the time I wasn't. So yeah, reflecting on why am I not feeling comfortable? What's going on here for me? What do I need to learn? What support do I need? That kind of thing. But yeah, I think having that experience with the team, I think did give me a lot of confidence. I grew so much personally and professionally within that role, and it helped me to kind of understand like what my own fears were, what all the things that were holding me back. Because there was a lot of things that like I said, the coach just kind of gave me free rein to do whatever I wanted, but there was still a part of me that was fearful of, oh, if I suggest this, it's not going to work, or they're not going to like it, or they're going to judge it, and stuff like that. So my confidence definitely grew during that time. And yeah, it was nice to be in that team environment because you've got that sort of like support around you, even though it feels lonely in the sense of you're the only psychology practitioner. But yeah, kind of having that support of others and being able to kind of talk to others about, again, obviously you've got to respect confidentiality, but just being able to talk about some of like the day-to-day issues and challenges that came up within the environment was really useful. But yeah, I think the confidence piece is big, and because I think we all experience imposter syndrome as a trainee psych, and yeah, it just, the more you keep, applying interventions with athletes, the easier it gets. It just becomes more natural the more that you do it. So it kind of just becomes second nature.
Yeah, I think it's very nice that in that phase of your career, this really nice experience just came into your career, and a really good place for you to develop your skill sets, to grow confidence as well. Looking forward to next week, basically your final week as a trainee. How are you feeling?
I guess mixed. I feel excited that it's, touch wood, about to come to the end of this process as a trainee. There's always going to be nerves when you're approaching something like a Viva, just as you would with it with an interview or a test. So yeah, I'm trying to keep the nerves at bay. Like I said, I've spoke to you before this. I've spoken to a few other trainees that have recently qualified, so they've recently done their Viva. So I'm just trying to learn from what other people's experiences have been, what it's been like for them, which has helped me to, relax about it a little bit, because yeah, it's obviously it's easier when you know what to expect, when you know kind of what the feel's going to be, what it's going to be like. So yeah, just trying to sort of prepare for what questions they might ask me. The good thing, certainly with the QSET Viva, is that through the feedback that they give you on your final submission, they do write some points about what they would like to discuss in the Viva. So that gives you a little bit of a clue of some of the questions that they're going to ask you. But yeah, just trying to kind of off of the work that I've submitted, because it was a few months back, just read through it so that I can remember it, but back to front. And I guess one of the advice that people have given me is around just making sure that I'm like relaying my experience as well to them, because they've only seen it all on paper, they've only seen what I've written, and that's just a snippet of it. So yeah, I've kind of told to just see the Viva as the accumulation of all of that work coming together, and me just kind of sharing what my own sort of personal experience and journey of that has been like.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, because you're just going to be talking about your work. So you kind of do have to back yourself and actually trust yourself, because you've experienced it. Now you just have to relay that information.
I do have a question. If you have to do all of this again, would you choose to do it again?
Obviously, if I just to do it all again, I would know a bit more what to expect. But yeah, it's been challenging. It's been really, really tough. It's been intense at times. I've got to the point almost of reaching burnout at different times. I've had to lean on certain people. So, as a trainee, your support network is huge. It's really important that you've got those people that you can go to when you're stressed out, when everything's getting on top of you, when you're feeling overwhelmed. So yeah, people within your personal life, as well as your supervisor and your kind of peers that are going through similar kind of challenges. So yeah, it's definitely not been an easy process. But again, just going back to how much I've grown through it and how much I've learned and developed, I can look back now and actually be quite pleased with what I've achieved, and actually start to recognize like the progress I'm making, and actually being part of a psychology community that I've signed up to as well. And now there's kind of trainees in that group that are just starting their journey, and it's nice for me to actually be able to kind of share what I've done with them, and kind of think about, like, I used to be in that place. Like, it seems like so long ago, but actually, like, yeah, like the challenges were real. The feelings were so real and so intense. But now I'm in this position. I'm kind of like, I've almost made it, and it feels really great.
Yeah, because people may think it's a long journey to become qualified, but actually these final few years when you're getting that experience, you're practicing what you want essentially you're being that practitioner and you're able to not just help athletes perform and thrive, but yourself, you've got to think about your own development in that process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what I would say to any training. We say it to athletes all the time. It's all about enjoying the process. And that's kind of what we need to do ourselves. Like really just, absorb yourself into what you can without getting burnt out. So it's not necessarily about saying yes to every single opportunity, but really taking the opportunities that are going to be of high quality, that are going to support your development, and really like use those opportunities to reflect on what you're learning, how it's kind of changing you, what impact it's having on you, as well as the athletes. And I think that just really helps. Yeah, I think it really helps you to become a well-rounded practitioner.
And there's a lot more opportunities out there. I mean, it is a very competitive, it's very competitive out there, but there are a lot more opportunities out there too. And sports psychology is more widely accepted.
Absolutely, yeah. There's so much more awareness around the importance of it and the value of it, and yeah, it is just about sometimes just carving your own path. Just keep speaking to people, keep connecting, keep asking for these opportunities, and they will come. And yeah, I had to do a lot of voluntary work in the beginning to get the experiences. And I don't necessarily think that we should have to do that voluntary work, but just right now where the field is at, if you don't do it, somebody else is going to happily do it. So, just you make sure if you are doing voluntary experiences, make sure you're getting what you need from it and that it's supporting your development and that you can then use that experience to help you with the next opportunity. Yeah. And even, things like if you're doing something for free, make sure you can get something out of it, like a testimonial or, for them to spread the word or to promote the work that you do.
Thank you so much, Ciara. Before we end today's episode, what would be the one final takeaway message you would give to some future trainee or some people who think about doing a sports psych degree?
I've shared quite a few here already today,
Yeah.
but I think just to keep at it, like, again, you said it earlier, Ciara, like trust in the process, trust in your abilities, trust in the actions that you're taking. So if you keep working hard, you will get the rewards. It's just, yeah, it's an ongoing process. So keep learning, keep working, keep grafting, and you will get something out of it. I think one of the things I've recently reflected on, especially from conversations with people that are ahead of me, is about patience. Just knowing if you're doing the right things, if you're taking all the actions you need to, making the right choices, something will come. It might not happen immediately, but you will see the fruits of your labor come eventually.
We wish you all the best next week.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.